The night before my wedding, my mother sent 4 words. Prioritizing your sisters. I just texted back, okay. They expected silence. The next morning, I signed the papers for a $6 million Tuscan villa and sent new invitations to everyone who quietly had my back. They thought I would just take it. They didn't know this quiet countermove, smooth as the Italian wind, would force everyone to finally choose their side. My name is Camille Rhodes. I am 32 years old, and I live in Seattle, in a glass apartment that overlooks the gray expanse of Elliott Bay. My life is built on precision, on logistics, on the clean lines of steel and reflective surfaces. I built a company by predicting delays and solving bottlenecks before they could happen. I manage chaos, which is why, when the text message arrived, I did not break. The phone lay on the quartz countertop, a black mirror reflecting the pale green lights of the city below. It was late, the persistent Seattle drizzle blurring the world outside. The message was from my mother. It contained exactly 4 words. Prioritizing your sisters. Not a phone call, not an explanation, not even the weak courtesy of an apology. Just a corporate-sounding statement. A decision delivered with the emotional sterility of a shipping update. Lena's wedding, the one she had announced 6 weeks after my fiancé and I had sent out our save the dates, the ones I had hand-stamped with wax seals, the one she had, with a tinkling laugh, scheduled for the exact same Saturday. A cold fist closed around my sternum, a familiar pressure I hadn't felt with such intensity in years. It was the same feeling I got when I was 8 years old. It was family portrait day, a humid afternoon in our cramped suburban backyard. Lena, beautiful and demanding even then, had wanted the center spot. I was pushed to the edge, slightly behind my father's shoulder. Just squeeze in, Camille, the photographer had said, impatient. When the proofs came back, I was a sliver of a floral dress and half an arm. When my mother framed the 5x7 for the mantelpiece, she hadn't chosen a different shot. She had just bought a frame that neatly cropped me out entirely. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of my apartment window. The woman staring back was calm. Her face was a mask of neutral efficiency. The apartment was silent. The only sound the faint hiss of the rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows. The lights of the bay blinked back at me, distant and cold. My home was a fortress of order, but that single text message had just breached the walls. I pulled on a rain jacket, not bothering with an umbrella. I needed the air, the wet grit of the city. I walked out into the misty night, the drizzle instantly cooling my face. Seattle in the rain has a particular smell, a mix of wet pavement, salt from the sound, and the distant bitterness of roasting coffee. I walked for blocks, my hands shoved deep in my pockets, replaying not the text, but the lifetime that led to it. I remembered all the justifications, all the times I had been sacrificed on the altar of convenience. It's just easier this way, Camille. That was the family motto, reserved exclusively for me. It was easier to let me walk home from school when Lena needed to be picked up from ballet. Even though her studio was blocks closer, it was easier to celebrate my 16th birthday jointly with Lena's half-birthday, because she couldn't bear not having a party. It was easier to ask me to handle the college financial aid forms for both of us, because I just understood that stuff. Easier for whom? It was the silent, unasked question of my entire life. The burden of being the capable one is that you are never seen as the one who needs. You are the infrastructure. You are the plumbing and the wiring. No one notices you until the water stops running. My function was to absorb the shock, to manage the logistics, to ensure the smooth running of the family narrative, a narrative in which Lena was always the star, and I was the stage manager, the lighting crew, and the person sweeping up after the show. I returned to my apartment, dripping water onto the polished concrete floors. I walked to the bookshelf, past the industry awards and the minimalist art, to a small, worn leather box. Inside was the evidence. There was the corner clipped from that 8-year-old family portrait, the jagged white edge where the scissors had finalized my removal. It was my only souvenir from that day. And there was another photo, a Thanksgiving dinner, maybe 5 years ago. Everyone was laughing, faces ruddy, raising their glasses. My chair, at the far end of the table, was empty. I knew exactly why. I had been in the kitchen, plating the desserts I had spent all morning making, while someone else snapped the perfect candid shot. When I saw it later on my mother's social media, captioned, "My whole world," I felt that familiar, dull ache. I had not been edited out this time. I simply had never been included. This was the nature of the love I knew. It was conditional. It was based on utility. My parents loved me. I believed that, but they loved Lena. I was the one who was easy, so I was the one who could be safely disappointed. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over my mother's name. I could call. I could rage. I could cry. I could perform the kind of raw, unfiltered hurt that Lena deployed so expertly to get her way. I could demand they honor their first promise. But I knew how it would play out. There would be sighs. My mother would say, "Camille, don't make this difficult," my father would say. "You know your sister. It's just easier." I would be managing their guilt. I would be organizing their apologies. I would be, once again, the one who had to handle it. I promised myself, standing there in the dark, that I would not beg. I would not compete for a spotlight I never wanted. I would not fight for a seat at a table that was never truly set for me. My fingers bypassed my mother's contact and found Ethan's. He answered on the second ring. His voice low and steady, always a ballast in my unsteady world. "Hey, you're up late." I took a breath. I kept my voice as level as the horizon over the bay. They chose Lena's wedding. There was a silence, not a shocked silence, but a processing silence. Ethan, a man who respected boundaries and measured his words, was absorbing the data. "Okay," he said finally. "How are you? Not what are you planning? How do you feel, Camille?" The question disarmed me. I leaned against the cold glass. "Tired," I whispered, the admission tearing a small hole in my composure. "I feel tired of auditioning for a role I never even wanted." "Then stop auditioning," he said, his voice firm but kind. "You're done. We're a team. So, what's the new plan?" A small, strange surge of relief, sharp and clean, cut through the pressure in my chest. He didn't offer sympathy. He didn't rail against the injustice. He just confirmed my reality and stood next to me. "We're still getting married," I said, my voice gaining strength. "On the same day we planned, but not in Colorado, not anymore." "Good," he said. "I'll pack my passport." We hung up. I looked at the dark screen of my phone. Then, I opened my messages and pulled up my mother's text. I typed 2 words, "Okay." I hit send. Then I walked over to my desk and opened my laptop. The screen flared to life, illuminating my face. I bypassed my work folders, my intricate logistics charts, and my email. I opened a private browser window and navigated to a folder in my bookmarks. It was labeled simply, Val di Serene. For years, I had bookmarked a specific property, a restored stone farmhouse, a villa, really, set in the rolling hills of Tuscany. It was an indulgence, a daydream, a place that represented an escape I never allowed myself to take. It was listed for a staggering amount, a sum that was absurd until I sold my company. Now, it was just a number. I looked at the photos, the ancient stone, golden in the sun, the long, rustic wooden table set under a canopy of grapevines, the rows of cypress trees standing guard. I stared out my window. The rain had picked up, and the drops were no longer a mist. They were thick, heavy streaks, sliding down the glass. They looked like scissor cuts, slicing through the reflection of my apartment, erasing the neat, orderly lines of my life. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was being cut out. I felt like I was the one holding the blades. My parents drew the blueprint for my life with 2 simple, defining roles. My sister, Lena, was born to shine. I was the one who worries. It was a narrative they reinforced daily. Lena was a creature of impulse and light, a whirlwind of charisma who was praised for her spontaneity, which was just a polite word for her profound lack of planning. I was the opposite. I was the planner, the worrier, the one who packed the sunscreen, checked the tire pressure, and brought a backup map. I was the one who reminded my parents about anniversaries and filed their taxes for them. Starting when I was 16 years old, Lena got applause for existing. I got a quiet nod for making existence possible. They mistook my competence for a lack of desire. They mistook my efficiency for a lack of feeling. When I left for college, I didn't gravitate toward the arts or humanities. I fell in love with supply chain management. To everyone else, it was the driest subject on earth. To me, it was magic. It was the study of how the entire world connected. I didn't see products on a shelf. I saw a global network of nodes, routes, bottlenecks, and dependencies. I saw the hidden architecture of modern life. It was a world that made sense. It was a system that, unlike my family, could be optimized. It was a puzzle of 1,000,000,000,000 pieces, and my job was to see the patterns, to find the weak link, and to build a stronger connection. I started LineaTrack from my junior year dorm room, fueled by stale coffee and a terror of failure. My walls weren't covered in posters. They were covered in interstate trucking route maps and algorithm flowcharts. I slept next to stacks of coding manuals. The concept was simple: optimizing high-stakes medical transport. While other companies were figuring out how to get shoes to customers in 2 days, I was figuring out how to get a donor organ across 3 states in 6 hours, navigating weather, traffic, and flight delays. My first major test run was a catastrophic failure. A children's hospital in Oregon was depending on a shipment of temperature-sensitive vaccines. My algorithm routed the truck, but it failed to account for a small-town parade that wasn't in any traffic database. The 2-hour delay meant the entire shipment was compromised. I flew to Portland on my own dime and stood in the loading dock while the logistics manager tore me apart. I didn't make excuses. I just listened. That day, I learned the single most important lesson of my life. A lesson I etched into the first page of every notebook I ever owned. Delay kills trust, in my world. "It's just easier," was the phrase that preceded a tragedy. I rebuilt the platform from the ground up, integrating hyperlocal event data, predictive weather modeling, and redundant routing options. I built a system defined by relentless reliability. For 5 years, LineaTrack was a small, profitable, niche company. I was respected in my field, but invisible to the wider world. Then the pandemic hit. Suddenly, the world's supply chains shattered. The systems everyone took for newfound land were broken, and my little company, the one obsessed with getting critical medical supplies through chaos, became a lifeline. We weren't just moving organs anymore. We were moving testing kits by the million. We were routing the first fragile shipments of vaccines. We were the plumbers in a burning building, the only ones who knew how the pipes connected. I worked 20-hour days for 18 months. I didn't see the outside. I just saw the map. I just solved the bottlenecks. When the world started to breathe again, I had 3 acquisition offers on the table. I took the largest one. The number was high enough to be abstract, a string of zeros that didn't feel real. After it closed, I didn't buy a yacht or a penthouse. I established a small venture fund dedicated to female founders in logistics and infrastructure, the other women who knew how to get things done, the warriors who were building the future. And I bought a small, temporary cabin on Bainbridge Island. It was the first time in my life I experienced true quiet. My Seattle apartment was the sound of the city. The cabin was the sound of wind and old-growth cedar. It smelled of damp earth and wood smoke. I sat on the porch for a week, just breathing, letting the quiet untangle the knots in my shoulders. It was there, in that tiny cabin kitchen, that Ethan proposed. I was trying to bake bread for the first time, covered in flour, my hair a mess. There was no ring, no spotlight, no audience. He just took my flour-dusted hands in his. "You don't have to prove anything anymore, Camille," he said. I cried for the first time since the company sold. I cried because he was the first person who didn't see me as a function. He saw me as a person. He was the only person who ever asked me to rest. We decided on a small wedding, a year out. We chose a beautiful rustic lodge in the Colorado mountains. It felt right, solid, grounded, peaceful. And I did what I do best. I planned. I built the master timeline. I vetted the vendors. I negotiated the contracts. I sent out the save the date 6 months early. Beautiful thick cardstock with a custom wax seal I designed myself. I believed, with a dangerous, naive optimism, that my own family would honor a contract. My parents were thrilled, or so they said. "We'll definitely be there, honey," my mother promised over the phone. "We wouldn't miss it for the world. We'll book our flights this week." I took that promise and built my event around it. I started the joyful, complex work of coordinating the relatives I genuinely loved. My Aunt Mary Ann, my cousin Ray, my quiet Uncle Victor, and my grandmother Helen. I called them, laughing, arranging their travel, booking their rooms. For the first time, I felt like I was using my logistical skills for something purely joyful, something for me. I was building my own table, and I was making sure there was a seat for everyone. I was fixing the empty chairs and the cropped photos of my past. Then, 6 weeks after my invitations went out, Lena called me. Her voice was champagne, bubbling with excitement. "Cammy, you'll never guess. It's the most amazing thing. You know how I've been seeing that musician, Mark? Well, we're getting married. And you will not believe the date the venue had open. It's the same as yours. Isn't that just destiny? We'll be wedding twins." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Lena, you can't. That's my wedding day. I've sent the invitations. People have booked flights." Her laugh tinkled. "Oh, Cammy, don't be so logistical. It's romance. It's fate. We'll make it work. It'll be a story." It was a story. All right, just not the one she thought. 2 days later, I got the call from my mother. It was brief. Lena's wedding would be in Boston, where they lived. It was just easier. Mark's family was large, and it was easier for everyone to gather there. "But my wedding," I said, my voice sounding small. "We know, honey," my father said, picking up the extension. "But you're so good at handling things. You're the practical one. You'll figure it out. We know you understand." I understood completely. When I hung up the phone, I didn't cry. I walked to my desk, past the framed photo of Ethan and me on the Bainbridge ferry. I opened my personal journal, a simple black notebook where I kept my non-negotiable truths. I uncapped my pen and wrote a single, steady line. "If they won't come to my table, I'll build a different one." I closed the journal. The decision was made. The contract was breached. The trust was dead. My anger wasn't hot. It was cold. It was the cold precision of a new algorithm clicking into place. The Colorado Lodge was a failed route. I opened my laptop. I didn't look at my wedding spreadsheets or my guest lists. I clicked the bookmark that I had saved for years. Val di Sereni, the villa in Tuscany. I pulled up the real estate listing again. The photos were clear. The golden stone, the cypress trees, the long wooden table under the vines. It wasn't a daydream anymore. It was a destination. The wire transfer for $6 million was the easiest, most sterile part of the entire transaction. It was just a number, a string of zeros sent from one bank in Seattle to another in Florence. It felt no different than authorizing a shipment of medical supplies. It was a logistical step, a problem solved. The flight, however, was a decompression. 12 hours in the air, suspended between the life I was leaving and the one I was about to claim. I didn't work. I didn't read. I just watched the flight map, that digital line moving across the globe, and I let the noise of my old life fall away with the altitude. I landed in Florence, collected my bags, and rented a small, unassuming Fiat. The drive south into Tuscany was a sensory assault. My Seattle world was muted, gray, and damp. This world was painfully vivid. The sky was an aggressive, deep blue. The sun was not a suggestion. It was a physical weight, a warmth that saturated everything. I drove with the windows down, the air rushing in, thick with the scent of sun-baked dust, wild rosemary, and the sharp, resinous smell of cypress trees. The villa was in a fictional valley, the Val di Sereni, the Valley of Serenity. The name felt like a cosmic joke, a bit too on the nose, but as I turned off the main road onto a white gravel path, the name settled on me. The road, the Strada Bianca, kicked up a plume of fine white dust behind me, and then I saw the driveway. It was a long quarter-mile lane lined with cypress trees so tall and dense they looked like an honor guard. They stood at perfect attention, their dark green spires a stark contrast to the silver green of the olive groves that rolled away on either side. At the end of the drive, the villa itself waited. It wasn't a palace. It was a fortress of warmth. It was built from honey-colored stone that seemed to glow from within, as if it had absorbed 1,000 years of sunlight. It was solid, permanent, and utterly silent. An old man was waiting for me on the stone steps, shaded by an ancient, gnarled wisteria. He was lean, dressed in simple gray trousers and a pressed white shirt. This was Aldo Rossi, the caretaker, whose family had worked this land for generations. He didn't smile, but his eyes were kind. He held a single, enormous, iron key. "Signorina Rhodes," he said, his voice like the gravel on the drive. He gestured to the house. "She is happy you are here." "It's beautiful, Aldo," I said, my voice feeling thin. He shook his head slightly, a small correction. "She is not beautiful. She is true. This house, she only opens her doors for those who truly see her." He placed the heavy key in my palm. The metal was cool and impossibly smooth from centuries of use. I unlocked the main door, a massive slab of chestnut wood, and pushed it open. The first thing I noticed was the cool. The thick stone walls held the night's chill, a welcome relief from the afternoon heat. I slipped off my shoes at the door, and my bare feet met the floor. It was terracotta, not the new, shiny kind, but ancient, worn tiles, the color of dried blood and apricots, cool and silky underfoot. I felt instantly, irrevocably grounded, as if I had plugged my entire nervous system into the earth. I walked through the house alone. Aldo had understood. This was a private meeting. My apartment in Seattle was glass and air. This house was stone and shadow. The light didn't flood in. It was invited, arriving in thick, golden shafts from the deep-set windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny stars. I ran my hand along the plaster walls, which were uneven, breathing, and painted a warm, creamy white. In the kitchen, a massive fireplace, big enough to stand in, dominated one wall. I went upstairs. The wooden doors to the bedrooms were warped with time, the surfaces of the chestnut showing the dark, swirling grain. I touched everything. I ran my fingers over the V-shaped grooves of hand-carved details, tracing the path of a craftsman who had died 300 years ago. This house wasn't a statement. It was a history. It was a testament to endurance. Finally, I stepped out onto the main terrace, and I saw the view. Rolling hills, quilted with vineyards and groves of olive trees, stretched to a hazy blue horizon, and below the terrace, on a wide, flat lawn, was the arbor, a long pergola, its wooden beams draped in thick, leafy grapevines. And under it, just as I had pictured, was a long, rustic wooden table. It was waiting. From the terrace, I could hear a sound, a faint, dry, whispering. I looked at the olive groves on the hill. The wind was moving through them, turning the leaves over in a coordinated wave, showing their silvery undersides. The sound was like a million tiny hands clapping. It was a soft, rustling applause. I stood there for a long time, just listening to it. The next day, I began to plan, but this was not the planning of my former life. This was not about optimization. It was about intention. I sat at that long table, the dappled sunlight creating a shifting lace pattern on my notebook. I sketched a seating chart. I wasn't maximizing space. I was creating intimacy. This would not be a spectacle. It would be an embrace. I drove to a nearby village and found a potter, an old woman with clay under her fingernails. I didn't order a standard set of plates. I commissioned 30 unique, hand-thrown chargers, each one slightly different, in shades of cream, sage, and earth. I found a woman who wove linen, and I ordered runners, not tablecloths, so the wood of the table could speak for itself. The only decorations would be branches from the olive trees outside and hundreds of small golden lanterns, hung from the vines like captured fireflies. I met the chef, Signora Lucia. She was a formidable woman in her 60s who arrived on a buzzing Vespa, a basket of vegetables strapped to the back. I started to talk about menus, about options, about accommodating tastes. She held up a hand, stopping me. "Signorina," she said, "we do not accommodate, we cook. You cannot impress people with food. You can only nourish them." She pointed to a tomato vine. "The food must tell the truth. It must taste of the sun, and the earth, and the time it took to grow. That is all." I hired her on the spot. That evening, I sat on the warm stone wall of the terrace, a glass of local wine in my hand, and watched the sunset. The light turned the honey stone to amber, then to a deep, bruised rose. The air grew cool, smelling of hyssop and wood smoke. I realized, with a sudden, sharp clarity, that I didn't need an audience. I had spent my entire life performing competence, performing reliability, performing strength, for a crowd that wasn't even watching. Here, with the ancient stone at my back and the valley darkening before me, there was no one to perform for. The applause of the olive trees was enough. I called Ethan. "You need to come," I said. "You need to see this place." He arrived 3 days later. He walked through the house in the same reverent silence I had. He found me on the terrace, and I saw the tension he always carried from his own high-pressure job simply dissolve from his shoulders. He wrapped his arms around me from behind. "You bought us a home, Camille," he murmured into my hair. "I bought us a new plan," I said. We talked about the ceremony that night, sitting at the long table under the stars. "I don't want to read from a piece of paper," he said, his hand covering mine on the rough wood. "The vows we wrote for Colorado, they feel like they belong to different people." "What do you want to do?" I asked. "I want to do it without a script," he said. "I just want to look at you, in front of the people who truly matter, and tell you the truth. No promises for a hypothetical future, just a statement for the present. Let's just talk to each other, in front of our true witnesses." True witnesses. The words echoed Aldo's. People who truly see. That was the moment the final piece clicked into place. My parents, Lena, the wedding in Boston. I had been operating on their terms. My reaction was still a reaction. My anger, my countermove. It was still a conversation with them. I would not call them. I would not email them. I would not send them a single photo of this place. This was not a trap I was setting. It was not a game of chicken. It was a choice. My decision to get married here, on this day, was not a secret meant to be discovered. It was a separate piece. They had made their priority clear. They chose what was easier. They had chosen Lena, and in doing so, they had given me a profound, unintentional gift. They had released me from my obligation to manage their feelings. They had a right to their choice, and I had a right to mine. I would let them have their perfect, convenient Boston wedding, free from the complication of my disapproval or my hurt. I would not give them my anger to manage. I would not give them a problem to solve. I would simply let them go. I would have my own wedding. I would be nourished. I would be seen. I went inside and took out a set of beautiful, thick cotton place cards. I uncapped my pen, and in my most careful script, I began to write the names of the people who would be flying in from all over the world, and under each name, I wrote the same 9 words. You are not just invited, you are seen. For the party favors, I commissioned bottles of olive oil, pressed from the very trees I could see from my window. The label was simple, It didn't have our names or the date. It just had 3 words. For showing up, the villa was secure. Ethan was on his way. My plan was set. Now, I just needed my guests. This was the moment of truth. My theory, that there was a scattered, silent network of people who, like me, were tired of the family's obligatory narrative, was about to be tested. I sat on the stone terrace with my laptop, a list of 25 names open in a spreadsheet. This wasn't just a guest list, it was a hypothesis. I took a deep breath and made the first call. My cousin, Rachel, who we called Ray. She was my mother's sister's daughter, a sarcastic, brilliant ER doctor in Chicago who had long ago opted out of most family drama by simply never showing up. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice already tired. "Camille, what's on fire? Wait, don't tell me. Your mom roped you into fixing Lena's seating chart, didn't she?" I laughed. The sound surprised me. "No, nothing like that. Actually, I have a logistical question for you." "Hit me," she said. "I've canceled the Colorado wedding." A beat of silence. Hallelujah. I was already dreading the altitude sickness. "So, eloping? City Hall? Please say City Hall." "Not exactly," I said. "I bought a house in Tuscany, and Ethan and I are getting married here, on the originally planned date, in about 3 weeks." Another, longer silence. I heard her exhale. "Tuscany, as in Italy, Tuscany. That's the one? And you're inviting who?" "People who will show up," I said quietly. "Ray, I'm not asking, I'm just setting a table, and there's a plate for you." "Send me the coordinates," she said, without a single beat of hesitation. "I've got a bank of vacation days I've been saving for an actual apocalypse. This is close enough. I'll be there. Cammy, God, I'll be there with bells on." My throat tightened. "You don't even know the details." "I know the details that matter. You, Ethan, and not in Boston. Send me the address." I hung up, feeling a strange, unfamiliar warmth spreading through my chest. 1 for 1. Next, I called my Aunt Mary Ann, Ray's mother. She was the family's designated peacemaker, a gentle soul who I always felt had been steamrolled by my mother and the drama surrounding Lena. She answered, her voice soft and anxious, as always. I explained the situation again, more gently this time. I told her what happened. I told her I wasn't angry. I was just done. I told her I had a new plan. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then, she let out a long, shaky breath. I felt I had been waiting her whole life to hear. "Oh, Camille," she whispered. "Thank goodness. I'm so tired." "Tired of what, Auntie?" "Tired of pretending," she said, her voice gaining a small, steely edge I had never heard before. "Tired of the script. Tired of acting like the sun rises and sets on Lena's latest whim. Tired of watching you be the shock absorber for this entire family for 30 years, your mother. She's my sister and I love her, but she made a choice, and I'm going to make mine." She paused, and I heard her tapping on a keyboard. "I'm booking my flight to Florence right now. Before I let myself feel guilty, you did the right thing, honey. You just built the escape hatch for the rest of us." I was blinking back tears now. 2 for 2. The third call was the hardest. My uncle Victor, my father's brother, a man of about 50 words, most of them, "Yep," "Nope," or "Pass the potatoes." He was a carpenter, a widower, a man who lived in the shadow of my father's more boisterous personality. He barely used his phone. He answered with a gruff, "Yeah?" "Hi, Uncle Victor. It's Camille." "Camille, heard you were getting married." "I am, but the plan changed. I'm not doing it in Colorado. I'm doing it in Italy, in 3 weeks. I'd really love it if you were there." I waited. The silence on the line was total. I thought he might have hung up. "Victor?" "Italy," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Yes, in Tuscany." "That's a long way," he said. My heart sank. "I know, it's a lot to ask. Don't worry if you can't." "I didn't say I couldn't," he grumbled. "Your father, he's being an idiot." My breath hitched. It was the most complete, opinionated sentence I had ever heard him utter. "It would mean the world to me if you came, Victor," I said. Another long pause, then my phone buzzed. A text message had come through. It was from him. It was just an emoji, a single, pixelated thumbs up. I laughed, a real barking laugh. "Got it, Uncle Victor. Thank you." "See you, kid," he said, and hung up. The last call was to my grandmother, Helen, my mother's mother, the matriarch, 91 years old, sharp as a box of tacks, and the only person in the family who had ever called my parents out on their favoritism. She had stopped coming to most holidays, saying the air was too thin. "Helen Rhodes," she answered, her voice like crisp parchment. "Grandma, it's Camille." "I know who it is. I've been waiting for your call. Your mother told me what she did, and she told me you said, 'Okay, I've been worried.' 'Okay' is what you say, before you set yourself on fire to keep others warm." I smiled. "I'm not on fire, Grandma. I'm just moving the fireplace." I told her everything: the text, the tiredness, the cabin, the villa, the cypress trees, the table. She listened, completely silent. "So," I finished, "I know it's an impossible trip, a ridiculous ask, but I'm getting married here, in Italy." "Camille," she said, her voice firm, "you've been confused about something for a very long time. Boston is not easier, for me. Boston is a 4-hour drive, a cramped guest room, and a weekend of biting my tongue so hard I taste blood. That is difficult. A 12-hour flight where a nice man brings me gin and blankets, to a house my granddaughter owns, to watch her finally choose herself. That, my dear, is the easiest trip I will ever take." She cackled, a dry, wonderful sound. "Now, send me the details, and tell me, does this Aldo person know how to make a real Negroni?" "I'll make sure he learns," I choked out. "Good girl," she said. "You finally learned the most important lesson. Camille, distance is not measured in miles. It's measured in who is willing to show up." That night, I created a new group chat. I invited Ray, Aunt Marianne, Uncle Victor, and Grandma Helen. I added Ethan. I named the group The Real Table. I posted the link to the villa, the flight information for Florence, and a list of charming Airbnbs and small hotels in the surrounding villages. The response was immediate. A few hours later, the chat exploded. Ray posted a screenshot of her flight confirmation. Aunt Marianne posted a picture of her passport, captioned, "Dusting this off." Uncle Victor sent a photo of an Italian phrasebook. The chat, which I had expected to be a simple organizational tool, became a nucleus. Ray added a few of her cousins from the other side of the family. Ethan added his sister and his 2 best friends from college. I tentatively added a few old friends of my own, women I hadn't seen in years but who, like me, had been on the periphery of the cool crowd. The response was overwhelming. It was a digital flood of support. The group chat filled with passport photos, booking confirmations, and giddy questions about the weather in Tuscany. It was like a dam of affection had broken. Ethan, a natural logistician himself, took over. He became the quiet, efficient backbone of the operation. He created a master spreadsheet, not of demands, but of offers. He organized minivan schedules from the Florence airport. He collected dietary restrictions. He started a thread on what adapters to bring. He was doing for me, for us, what I had done for my family my entire life. He was handling it, and he was doing it with joy. Signora Lucia, upon hearing the guest count had swelled to 30, sent over a proposed 6-course menu. I posted it in the chat. It was a poem, Papa al pomodoro, fresh peachy pasta with wild boar ragu, bistecca alla fiorentina seared over olive wood, a simple salad of greens from her own garden, a cheese course of local pecorino with honey, a lemon almond torta. The group chat went wild. "I am coming for love, but I am staying for that bistecca." Ray wrote, My God, wrote Ethan's sister, is it too late to get married to the pasta? In the midst of this joyful, chaotic planning, an unspoken rule emerged. No one mentioned Boston. No one mentioned my parents. No one, not once, attacked Lena. The conversation was not about the place they were leaving. It was entirely, joyfully, about the place they were going. And then, the quiet messages started. Direct messages. Not to the group, but just to me. From a woman who had been in my coding study group in college. Cammy, I'm booking my flight. I just wanted to say, we always saw you. We saw you do all the work while others took the credit. We saw you. From one of Ethan's friends, a man I'd only met a handful of times. Camille, I've never seen Ethan this happy. Seeing you two together, it just makes sense. We wouldn't miss this for the world. My RSVP list, which I had feared would be empty, was full. Every single plate I had commissioned from the potter would be used. Curiosity got the better of me one night. I called my cousin Ray. Hey, I said, trying to sound casual. Just out of curiosity, did you RSVP to my mom for Boston? Ray laughed. Oh, honey, no. I sent a very polite, regretfully decline. So did my mom. And last I heard, Grandma Helen sent back the invitation with a single red question mark drawn on it. And Uncle Victor? I don't think he even opened the envelope. A strange, cold feeling settled in my stomach. I pulled up the original guest list for the Colorado wedding, the one my parents had seen. Most of these names. They were all in my group chat now. My aunts, my uncles, my cousins, the core family friends. They were all coming to Italy. I imagined my mother, back in Boston, looking at her own RSVP list. I imagined the wave of regretfully declines. I imagined the polite, flimsy excuses. A sudden conflict. So sorry to miss it. Traveling. They were all traveling to my wedding. I closed my laptop and stood on the terrace. The wind was rustling the olive trees. That soft, papery applause. I breathed in the cool night air. This wasn't a faction. I hadn't created sides. I had just set a table, and in doing so, I had held up a truth test. My family wasn't being split by my choice. It was just being sorted. It was an audit, not of loyalty, but of action. I had finally learned that family is not a noun defined by blood. It is a verb, defined by who shows up, and my real family was on its way, in Boston, at the Aurelius Hotel. The preparations were about control. The grand ballroom was a cavern of calculated opulence, a room designed to intimidate, not to welcome. The hotel's air conditioning kept the temperature at a precise 68 degrees, cold enough to preserve the towering floral arrangements. The scent in the air was a sharp, chemical mix of industrial carpet cleaner and lilies. Thousands of crystals hung from a dozen chandeliers, refracting a cold, brittle light. The walls were draped in heavy ice-blue silk. A team of 4 photographers stood in the center of the vast, empty room, conferring in hushed, serious tones. The processional will be problematic. The lead photographer, a man with a severe black turtleneck, said to his assistant, "The RSVPs are light. We will have to use a 70 to 200 millimeter lens. Tight on the faces. We'll shoot from a low angle to compress the background. We can't show the empty chairs in the family rows. It will read as tragedy." His assistant nodded. "What about the wide shot during the vows?" "We'll stage it, after the bride is at the altar. We'll have the coordinator discreetly ask the guests from the back 10 rows to move forward, to fill in. It's the only way to make the room feel populated." In Tuscany, at the villa, the preparations were about release. The air was warm and alive, moving in slow currents through the open doors, carrying the scent of wild rosemary, thyme, and the sweet yeast-driven smell of Signora Lucia's baking bread. Aldo and my Uncle Victor were on ladders, stringing hundreds of small glass lanterns through the thick green canopy of the grapevine pergola. The lights were the color of warm honey. They weren't meant to illuminate. They were meant to glow. The long, bare wooden table was already the center of all activity. Ray's 7-year-old daughter, Maya, and Ethan's nephew, Leo, were in a serious competition to see who could learn Italian faster. They ran back and forth on the lawn, clutching glasses of lemonade, shouting grazie and per favore at the top of their lungs, dissolving into fits of giggles when Aldo corrected their pronunciation. In Boston, the wedding planner, a woman with a sleek black tablet and a face frozen in an expression of polite panic, was rewriting the timeline for the third time. "We have a pacing issue," she announced to my mother. "Judy, with the current guest count, the receiving line will be finished in under 15 minutes. It will look abrupt. It will highlight the gaps." My mother, looking pale in the cold light, wrung her hands. "What do we do?" "We'll move the champagne toast to before the dinner," the planner said, tapping aggressively at her screen. "We will shorten the cocktail hour to create a denser crowd feel in the foyer, then open the doors. We'll serve the first course immediately. We need to keep the event moving. Dead air is our enemy." In Tuscany, Signora Lucia was holding her own planning session in the villa's kitchen, which was already overflowing with crates of vegetables, rounds of cheese, and the earthy smell of truffles. She had appointed Maya and Leo as her official assistants. "Now," she said, handing Leo a small bowl of coarse sea salt, "the focaccia. You cannot just dump the salt. You must bless it." "Bless it?" Leo asked, his eyes wide. "See," from high up. Lucia took his small, chubby hand and raised it high above the oiled dough. "You must sprinkle it like the sea rain. You must be generous. The food must know you care, or the truth of the flavor will not come out." Leo sprinkled the salt, laughing as the white crystals bounced off the dough and dusted his nose. The truth, it seemed, was delicious. In Boston, my mother Judy sat in the hotel's bridal suite, a cavernous, beige room that cost $4,000 a night. She was staring at her RSVP spreadsheet on her laptop. The list of names highlighted in yellow, the regretfully declines, was longer than the list highlighted in green. "I just don't understand," she said, her voice thin and cracking. She was speaking to my father, Robert, who was staring out the window at the Boston traffic. "Marianne, Ray, Victor, they always come. They were coming to Colorado. Why would they all have sudden, unavoidable conflicts?" My father didn't answer. "And Helen?" my mother continued, her voice rising with a note of hysteria. "My own mother, 91 years old. She's traveling. Where could she possibly be traveling? It's cruel. It's a coordinated, cruel snub." In Tuscany, my grandmother Helen, 91 years old, was not traveling. She had arrived. She was sitting in a perfectly worn leather armchair on the terrace, a glass of water and a small plate of olives by her side. She had refused the Negroni, stating she needed a clear head. She was holding a basket of freshly cut olive sprigs on her lap. Aunt Marianne sat at her feet. Helen was carefully inspecting each branch, her fingers, gnarled with arthritis, moving with surprising deftness. "This one," she declared, holding up a sprig with 7 perfect, silver-green leaves. "This will be for Camille's hair, and this one for Ethan's buttonhole." "They're beautiful, Mom," Marianne said. "Of course they are," Helen snapped, though her eyes were soft. "They're not trying to be beautiful. They're just real. No need for hothouse flowers that are bred to be fragile and die in an hour. We will wear the thing that endures. We will wear the thing that knows how to grow in the rocks." In Boston, Lena stood on a plush, circular pedestal in the center of the presidential suite, surrounded by 3-way mirrors. Her wedding dress was a masterpiece of modern design, a cascade of designer lace, a 20-foot-long veil, and thousands of hand-sewn pearls that shimmered in the cold light. It was a dress built for an audience. It was stunning. She turned, slowly, watching her reflection multiply in the mirrors. She was beautiful. The dress was perfect. The suite was perfect. But her eyes, as they met her own gaze, looked lost. The room was vast and beautiful, but it was utterly silent. The mirrors only reflected herself, over and over. a perfect bride in an empty, echoing chamber. In Tuscany, I was walking alone, shoeless, in the olive grove. The sun was beginning its slow descent, and the light, that famous Tuscan gold, was so thick it felt like I could hold it in my hand. I wasn't wearing a gown. I was in simple, comfortable linen pants and a soft cotton shirt. I stopped at one of the oldest trees in the grove, a tree that Aldo had told me was over 400 years old. I reached out and placed my hand on its trunk. The bark was a landscape, a geography of time, deeply grooved and textured. A patch of cool, damp, vibrant green moss grew in a shaded cleft. I pressed my palm against it, feeling the grit, the life, the deep, slow pull of the roots anchored in the earth. I was not reflected. I was connected. In Boston, my father, Robert, was pacing the expensive beige carpet, his cell phone pressed tight against his ear. He was leaving his third voicemail of the day for his brother. "Victor, it's Robert again. Listen, Judy's really spinning out about you not coming. We just chose the path of least resistance. You know how Lena gets. It was just easier. We assumed Camille would understand. She's the practical one. It was easier." He hung up, the word easier dissolving into the sterile, conditioned air. He was beginning to understand, with a creeping, cold dread, that the easier path had just trapped him in a cage of his own making. In Tuscany, Uncle Victor was not answering his phone. His phone was, in fact, turned off, and sitting in a drawer in his rented room. He was sitting on the stone steps of the terrace with Ethan. Victor, it turned out, was a surprisingly soulful musician. He had found an old, battered acoustic guitar in the villa's study and had just finished restringing it. He was picking out a slow, gravelly, 12-bar blues progression. His calloused carpenter's fingers moved with a grace that defied their roughness. Ethan, who played a little, was watching his hands, finding the harmony, strumming the answering chords. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. They were just playing. The bluesy, American notes drifting out over the ancient Italian valley. A conversation richer and truer than any words. The two worlds were about to collide. The seed of the cataclysm was planted in Boston. The lead photographer, the one worried about the empty seats, was taking his 15-minute break in the hotel's grand lobby. He was scrolling through his Instagram feed, killing time. He followed several other high-end event photographers, including one from Chicago. That Chicago photographer had just reshared an Instagram story. He tapped on it. The video was shaky, loud with laughter and conversation. It panned across a stunningly long, rustic wooden table set under a canopy of grapevines, glittering with what looked like hundreds of tiny, warm lights. It showed a woman he vaguely recognized, Dr. Rachel Rhodes, raising a glass of wine. The location tag was simple: Val di Serene, Toscana. The photographer frowned. He clicked on Ray's profile. It was public. The last 3 posts were a gallery, a selfie of Ray, and a very old, very regal-looking woman, captioned, "My grandmother, the Queen, has arrived." A close-up shot of a beautiful, hand-thrown ceramic plate on a linen runner, captioned, "The details," and a final, sprawling group photo of at least 30 people on a sun-drenched stone terrace, everyone raising a wine glass, the joy on their faces palpable. The caption was simple: "The real table. See you tomorrow. Cammy and Ethan." Cammy. The photographer's blood ran cold. He pulled up his call sheet for the next day. Wedding. Lena Rhodes and Mark Donovan. He looked back at the phone. Cammy, Camille. He walked back up to the presidential suite, his heart pounding with the dread of a man who knows he's about to deliver catastrophic news. He found my mother, Judy, now arguing with the planner about the color of the lighting. "Excuse me, Mrs. Rhodes," the photographer said, his voice quiet, holding up his phone. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think there might be some confusion. Are there 2 family weddings tomorrow? Because I'm seeing this from Italy, from your family." My mother's phone, which had been distressingly quiet for days, began to light up. My phone, which I had left on the kitchen counter in Tuscany, remained silent, just as I intended. In Boston, a cold, sickening panic was setting in. The performance was 24 hours away, and they had just learned the audience had gone to another show. The stage was set. The orchestra was warming up, but the theater was empty. In Tuscany, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of apricot and lavender. Signora Lucia was lighting the wood-fired oven. Ethan and Victor's impromptu blues concert had attracted a small, appreciative audience. We were not preparing for a performance. We were just getting ready for dinner. 2 weddings, on the same day, on opposite sides of the world. One was a stage, the other was a table. The silence was about to break. The real table arrived not in a graceful procession, but in a cloud of white dust and diesel fumes. 3 9-seater minivans, which Ethan had coordinated with military precision, came rumbling up the cypress-lined drive, looking battered from the journey from Florence. The doors slid open, and my family, my real family, tumbled out. They were blinking in the bright afternoon sun, looking rumpled, jet-lagged, and absolutely glorious. Ray was the first one out, shielding her eyes. "Okay," she announced to the group. "On a scale of 1 to 10, how much do we hate Alitalia? I'll go first. 11. A chorus of groans erupted. "My primary suitcase is currently enjoying an unscheduled vacation in Barcelona," Aunt Marianne said, sounding surprisingly cheerful about it. It turned out that a wildcat baggage handler's strike in Rome had sent nearly half their luggage to random, scenic corners of Europe. My carefully chosen guests, my 30 witnesses, had arrived for a destination wedding with little more than their carry-ons. "We are a disaster," Ray declared, striking a pose on the white gravel. "We smell like airport carpet, we have no clean clothes, and we are about to have the greatest wedding of all time." Uncle Victor just grunted, pulled a duty-free carton of cigarettes from his jacket, and looked at the villa. Nice. Ethan's nephew, Leo, and Ray's daughter, Maya, immediately started a game of tag on the lawn, their shrill laughs cutting through the adult groans. "I counted 124 trees," Leo yelled. "They look like green soldiers." And just as Aldo and I were starting to hand out room keys, the sky, which had been a perfect, uninterrupted Tuscan blue, abruptly changed its mind. The wind picked up from nowhere, and a second later, the heavens opened. It was not a gentle mist, it was a deluge, a sudden, 10-minute flash storm. Everyone grabbed what few bags they had and scrambled inside, screaming and laughing as the warm rain soaked them in seconds. We stood crowded in the villa's massive stone entryway, dripping onto the ancient terracotta floor, breathless and giddy. And as quickly as it had begun, it stopped. The sun punched back through the clouds. We all crept back outside onto the terrace. The storm had washed every speck of dust from the air. The valley smelled incredible, a deep, pungent, almost electric scent of wet stone, wild mint, and damp earth. Grandma Helen, who had been ushered in first like the queen she was, stood at the open doorway, leaning on her cane. "Well, good," she declared, sniffing the air. "The land needed a drink. Wash the travel off all of us. Now, Camille, I was promised a Negroni. Let's not disappoint the elderly." That evening, as everyone was settling in, the villa decided to offer its own welcome. We were all gathered in the main room, the kids playing on the floor, the adults marveling at the thick wooden beams above. The lights glowed warmly. Then they flickered, once, twice, and went out. The house was plunged into a sudden, deep darkness, lit only by the last sliver of twilight through the windows. A collective gasp, followed by Ray's voice. "Okay, now it's an official adventure. Who's got the ghost stories?" From the dark hallway, Aldo's voice was perfectly calm. "Un momento. The storm. She has startled the electricity." We heard the heavy, satisfying thunk of a main breaker being reset. The lights flooded back on, warm and steady. Aldo reappeared, a small, knowing smile on his face. "The house," he said. "She is just testing us. She wants to see if we are the kind of people who panic, or the kind of people who know how to light a candle." The second test came an hour later. Aunt Marianne, in her newfound state of post-travel giddiness, was helping Signora Lucia in the kitchen. She picked up one of the beautiful, hand-thrown ceramic vases I had commissioned, intending to fill it with olive branches. She turned, tripped on the uneven stone floor, and the vase crashed to the ground. Silence. Marianne looked absolutely horrified. "Oh, Camille, you're beautiful. Oh, Lucia, I'm so sorry." The vase hadn't shattered, but a long, visible, dramatic crack now ran from the rim to the base. It was a ceramic scar. Signora Lucia bustled over, tutting. She picked up the two pieces, which still held together. She inspected the crack with a critical eye. "Marianne, per favore," Lucia said, her voice firm. "It is not broken. It is finished." "Finished?" Marianne whispered, her face pale. "See, before, it was just a new thing, a pot. Now, it has a story. It has lived. A thing that lives must have a scar. In my opinion, it is more beautiful now than when it was perfect." She took the vase, wedged the olive branches inside so they splayed perfectly against the new crack, and placed it in the center of the massive kitchen island. "See, now, it has character." I watched Aunt Marianne. A small, strange smile crossed her face. I had the feeling Lucia hadn't just been talking about the pottery. That night, we didn't have a formal rehearsal dinner. We just had dinner. The long table under the pergola was lit by the hundreds of lanterns, which now glowed in the dusk. Lucia's team served enormous, steaming platters of pasta and roasted vegetables that had been pulled from the garden that afternoon. The wine flowed. I went around the table and placed the thick cotton place cards I had written. I had added a small, personal, handwritten note on the back of each one. For Ray, thank you for always being the first to say yes. For Aunt Marianne, your gentleness is your strength. I'm so glad you're here. For Uncle Victor, your presence speaks louder than any words. Thank you. For Grandma Helen, you taught me the difference between a house and a home. Welcome. A quiet, emotional hush fell over the table as, one by one, people found their seats and turned their cards over. After the plates were cleared, Ethan stood up, tapping his wine glass. The laughter died down. He said, his voice carrying in the warm, still air. "We're not having a rehearsal. Camille and I, we're not going to be reading prepared vows tomorrow. We just want to be present. But tonight, we wanted to practice. Not practice our vows, but practice what this is all about, which is just showing up and telling the truth." He looked at me, his eyes dark and steady in the lantern light. "So, instead of a toast, I just want to tell you all why I'm here." He told the story of the first time he really saw me. It wasn't at a gala. It wasn't over a candlelit dinner. It was at 3 a.m, in the loading dock of a refrigerated warehouse in Tacoma, in the middle of a torrential rainstorm. "She was standing under a single, flickering fluorescent light," he said, his voice soft. "Her hair was plastered to her face. She was wearing a bright yellow safety vest over her coat, and she was, very calmly, explaining to a dispatcher 3 times her size exactly how his entire logistics chain had just collapsed. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't emotional. She was just stating the facts. She was a lighthouse. She was standing in the middle of a Category 5 hurricane of chaos, and she was the calmest, most solid thing I had ever seen." He smiled at me. I think I fell in love with her logistics charts before I fell in love with her. I knew then that this was the woman I wanted to stand next to, especially when the storms hit. I'm just so honored that we're finally in our own harbor. He raised his glass. "To the harbor, now. Who's next?" It was spontaneous. One by one, our friends, our family, stood up. They didn't read from phones. They just told their truth. Ray stood, raising her glass. I'm here because Camille is the only person in our entire family who has never, not once, asked me for anything. She just gave, it's about damn time she got a return on her investment, to Cammy. Uncle Victor stood. He cleared his throat. The entire table leaned in. Your dad's an idiot, he said, his voice like gravel. He raised his glass to me. You're not glad you're happy. He sat down. It was the speech of a lifetime. Finally, Grandma Helen rose, leaning on her cane. The table went silent. I have seen a lot of things in my 91 years, she said, her voice clear as a bell. I've seen people get married for money, for convenience, and for fear of being alone. I have watched my own daughters, she said, her eyes finding Marianne. Try to manage the unmanageable. She looked straight at me, her gaze pinning me. There has been a lot of hurt in this family, a lot of quiet wounds and empty chairs. We all know it. We don't have to pretend we don't. We're not here tonight to fix the past. We can't. She gestured toward the cracked vase, now sitting in the center of the table, full of olive branches. The past is a cracked pot. We are here to say that the cracks are part of the story. We are here to say that showing up is the only thing that's real. Camille, you didn't just build a new table. You built a future. Thank you for inviting us to it. I sat there, Ethan's hand holding mine so tightly my bones ached, and I was completely, utterly undone. I wasn't just crying, I was new. I had spent my entire life trying to earn a seat, trying to be good enough, organized enough, quiet enough, to not be cropped out of the picture. And here, in the middle of an Italian valley, surrounded by people in borrowed clothes, I realized I had it all wrong. Family isn't something you are born into. It's not a debt you owe. It is a thing you build. It's a choice. It's a structure built with honest miter joints and steady hands. Like a table from Uncle Victor's workshop. It can be repaired. It can be rebuilt. And it only stands if people are willing to sit at it together. Later that night, long after everyone had gone to bed, I was standing in the quiet kitchen, my phone in my hand for the first time all day. And there it was. The message I knew was coming. It was from my mother. It was not a text. It was a wall of text. A frantic, rambling, guilt-ridden paragraph. I skimmed the words. Don't know why you would do this. Deliberately cruel. Humiliating your sister. We had no choice. It was just easier. And then, the last line. The line that proved she still, after all of this, did not understand. It is not too late. Camille, you can still change the date. We can fly out next month. You can still fix this. You can still fix this. My entire life, in 5 words, I was the fixer, the logistician, the one who manages the crisis. I looked at the message. I saw the 3 pulsing dots as she was typing more. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I just felt distance, a calm, clean, continental divide. I pressed the power button, and the screen went black. I did not reply. I did not explain. I did not engage. I left the message on read. It was the first time in my life I was refusing to manage her crisis. I walked outside onto the terrace. The wedding was tomorrow. The air was cool and sweet. The wind moved through the pergola, and the hundreds of little glass lanterns, their candles still burning, chimed softly against each other. They sounded like a quiet, whispering choir. I was ready. The wedding in Boston began at precisely 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Eastern Standard Time. In the cavernous, ice-blue ballroom of the Aurelius Hotel, the string quartet, hired for an obscene amount of money, began to play Pachelbel's canon. The sound was thin and brittle, absorbed instantly by the thick carpet and the heavy silk drapes. There were perhaps 60 guests scattered among 300 delicate gold chairs. The front 2 rows, reserved for family, were a sea of white ribbon and conspicuous emptiness. The lead photographer, his face pale with stress, whispered urgently to the wedding planner, "You have to move them. You have to get the people from the back and pull them forward. We need to fill the front. It looks like a funeral." The planner nodded curtly, her eyes darting. She began to dispatch ushers, who moved awkwardly through the sparse rows, whispering to distant cousins and confused friends of the groom. "Excuse me, would you mind moving closer to the front? The family would like you to be closer." The wedding in Tuscany began at 10 Central European Time. The sun, a heavy golden disk, was pouring honey-colored light across the stone terrace. There were no rented chairs, just 30 mismatched wooden chairs, gathered from every room in the villa, set in a loose, intimate semicircle under the grapevine pergola. There was no string quartet. There was just my Uncle Victor, sitting on a stone bench, his acoustic guitar on his knee, picking out a simple, meandering blues tune that was surprisingly sweet. The only other sound was the breeze, rustling the olive leaves. In Boston, the massive ballroom doors swung open. My sister, Lena, made her entrance. She was a work of art. Her dress was a spectacle of lace and pearls. Her veil, a 20-foot-long whisper, was carried by 2 small children who looked terrified. She was a perfect bride, built for a spotlight. She began her long, lonely walk down the vast, empty-feeling aisle. She was smiling, a practiced, brilliant smile, but as she drew closer, her eyes scanned the front rows. She saw the strangers who had been shoved into place. She saw the yawning, empty seats where our grandmother, our aunt, our uncle, and our cousins were supposed to be. Her perfect smile did not falter, but it seemed to freeze, to become a mask. The light in her eyes dimmed by half. In Tuscany, I was not waiting behind a door. I was just walking over. I stepped out of the villa's ancient, arched stone doorway. I was wearing a simple, cream-colored silk dress that I had bought in the local village, and I was barefoot, my feet cool on the ancient stones. I had a sprig of olive leaves in my hair. As I walked toward the semicircle, my grandmother, Helen, who was sitting in the front row, struggled to her feet. She did not clap. She did not cry. She simply raised her own hand, which held a single, identical sprig of olive. She held it up to me as I passed, a silent, primal gesture of recognition, a coronation of equals. In Boston, the paid officiant, a man with a booming theatrical voice, began his script. "We are gathered here today, in this beautiful space, to celebrate the joining of 2 souls, Lena and Mark. A wedding is a magical time, the moment one family becomes 2, and 2 families become 1. In Tuscany, Aldo Rossi stood with us. He had, it turned out, been deputized by the local mayor to perform civil ceremonies. He was not an actor, he was a caretaker, in a simple dark suit. He looked at us, his eyes kind. He looked at the 30 faces watching. He gestured to the assembled group. "In my life," he said, his Italian accent thick and warm, "I have seen many, many parties. Today is not a party. It is a promise." He looked directly at me. "Signorina Camille, Signor Ethan, today, we do not count the guests who were invited. We count only those who have arrived, and I can see everyone is here." In Boston, Lena recited her vows, which were long and poetic. She spoke of destiny and soulmates, and a love that was written in the stars. Her voice was beautiful. She was performing for the back row, for the cameras, for the echoing, empty space. In Tuscany, it was my turn. I turned to face Ethan, taking both of his hands. There was no paper. There was no script. I looked into his eyes, the only audience I had ever needed. "Ethan," I said, my voice thick and unsteady, but mine. "For my entire life, I thought love was something you had to earn. I thought it was a reward for being quiet, for being capable, and for being convenient. I thought I had to be the fixer, the planner, the one who made things easier, and then I met you." I squeezed his hands. "You were the first person who ever saw me without needing me to be useful. You never asked me to be easier. You just asked me to be. You were the first person to show up. Just for me, with no agenda. You are my home." I had to stop, to take a breath. I looked around the semicircle, at Ray's tear-streaked face, at Victor's stoic nod, at Helen's fierce, proud gaze. In front of all our witnesses, I said, my voice clearing, in front of our real table, I promise to see you just as you see me. I promise to be your harbor, and I promise to show up, every day, for the rest of our lives. I love you. Ethan just smiled, his own eyes wet. Camille, he said simply, you were never the fixer. You were the foundation. I'm just so glad we're finally home. In Boston, after a chaste, staged kiss, the MC bounded onto the stage, his microphone already live. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. and Mrs. Mark Donovan, let's hear it. A spatter of polite, hesitant applause filled the room. He was trying to inject energy where there was none. Give it up for the happy couple, and let's hear it for the families, he boomed. Family is everything. Folks, at the end of the day, family is all that matters. In the third row, a distant, second cousin, one of the few who had actually come from my mother's side, let out a single, dry cough. It was an involuntary, nervous, awkward sound. In the cavernous, strained silence of the ballroom, it was as loud as a gunshot. It was the sound of a truth, unspoken, puncturing the performance. The moment of contamination began as the guests were being ushered into the equally vast, cold foyer for the cocktail hour. A bored college friend of Lena's, standing alone, pulled out her phone. She opened Instagram. She saw it. Ray's most recent post, not a story, a permanent grid post. It was a photo, taken just 30 minutes earlier, of 30 people, their faces bright with joy, raising their glasses in a toast. The location tag was clear, Val di Serene, Toscana. The caption was clearer. Here to celebrate the real wedding. Congratulations, Camille and Ethan. We love you. The girl gasped. She grabbed the arm of the person next to her. Oh my God, look, is that Camille? Is that Aunt Marianne? Wait, is that Grandma Helen? The phone was passed, then another was opened, and another. A silent digital tide ripped through the cocktail hour. The polite murmuring stopped. Small, tight knots of guests formed, huddled around glowing screens. They weren't talking about Lena's dress. They were staring, with a kind of horrified, fascinated awe, at the images streaming in from Italy. They saw the joy. They saw the crowd. They saw the sun, the stone, the food. They saw the long, magnificent table, groaning with food, lit by hundreds of lanterns. They saw my grandmother, 91 years old, laughing, with a glass of champagne in her hand. They saw Uncle Victor, his arm around a beaming Aunt Marianne. They saw every single person whose absence had just defined the ceremony they had witnessed. My mother, Judy, was attempting to perform her role as host. Her face was a brittle mask of hospitality. She saw a cluster of her own cousins, huddled by the bar, staring at a phone. What is it? She asked, her voice a high-pitched trill. What's so fascinating? Did you get a good picture of Lena? Her cousin looked up, his face pale and guilty, as if he'd been caught. He didn't know what to say. He just held up the phone. My mother looked. She saw the photo. She saw the 30 faces. She saw Helen. She saw Marianne. She saw Victor. She saw Ray. She saw every face that had sent her a regretfully decline. And in the center, she saw me. My face tilted up to Ethan's, laughing. She froze. The hostess' smile shattered, collapsing into a mask of pure, blank shock. Her hand, holding a champagne flute, began to shake. In Tuscany. We were not in a cocktail hour. We were at the table. The ceremony had flowed seamlessly into the feast. Lucia's team was bringing out platters of bistecca, charred and perfect, and bowls of pasta, and bottles of wine were being passed hand to hand down the long, loud table. Maya and Leo, having fulfilled their duty of throwing olive leaves, were now playing tag under the pergola, dodging waiters and uncles. Signora Lucia stood at the kitchen door, watching the scene, the noise, The laughter, the sheer, unbridled joy. She saw me wipe a smear of ragu from Ethan's chin and saw him kiss me. She saw Helen telling a story that made Uncle Victor laugh, a real, barking laugh. Lucia put a flour-dusted hand to her chest. She had to look away for a second, her own eyes filling. "Ah, Mamma Mia," she whispered to herself. "Mangia, manja, eat, eat, all this joy. The food will get cold." I stood up, my hand in Ethan's. I raised my glass. The happy, chaotic noise slowly subsided. I said, my voice thick. "I just have one thing to say." I looked down the long, beautiful, full table, at every face that had chosen to be here. "Thank you," I said. "Thank you for showing up." And then, a sound I will never forget. Led by Ray, all 30 of them rose to their feet. 30 glasses, of all shapes and sizes, were raised in the air. "To Camille!" Ray shouted. "To Ethan!" yelled his best man. "To the real table," my grandmother's voice cried out, clear as a bell. And the sound of 30 glasses clinking, colliding, celebrating. It wasn't a polite tink, it was a crash, a symphony, a joyous, bright explosion. It was the sound of 100 small, happy birds taking flight, all at once. Our photographer, the woman who had barely said a word, was moving like a ghost. She never asked us to pose. She never said smile. She was just capturing. At one point, in the middle of the toast, I grabbed Ethan, and Ray threw her arm around me, and Victor put his hand on her shoulder, and Grandma Helen was laughing, and Maya ran into the frame, her mouth covered in chocolate. The photographer snapped the shutter. It was a blur of motion, of half-seen faces, of spilled wine, and of a joy so profound it was messy. It wasn't a family portrait. It was a family. The photo that, when we saw it weeks later, we knew was the only one that mattered. It was the one that would define the day, the one that was, simply, the real table. The sun rises differently in Tuscany. It doesn't just appear, it spills. It moves across the valley like liquid gold. First touching the tops of the cypress trees, then pouring down the slopes, warming the silver-green olive leaves, and finally pooling on the ancient stone of the terrace. I was sitting at the kitchen table at 8 o'clock, the villa quiet around me. The last of our guests were still asleep. The air smelled of coffee, and the wild thyme growing between the stones. I had my phone in my hand, plugged into the wall, charging. It had been off for nearly 36 hours. Ethan was on the terrace, reading, a silent, steady presence. Grandma Helen was in her armchair, nursing a small cup of what she called engine-starting tea. I took a deep breath. I pressed the power button. It was an avalanche, a digital deluge of rage. 27 missed calls from my mother, 14 from my father, a string of increasingly hysterical text messages from Lena, starting with, "Where is everyone?" and ending with a waterfall of accusation. I looked at the screen, my heart beating a low, steady rhythm. I felt no panic. I felt no guilt. I just felt observation. I was a logistician watching a predictable system failure. I picked up the phone just as it began to ring again. My mother. I accepted the call. I did not put it to my ear. I pressed the speaker button and set the phone on the heavy wooden table. A sound like a pressurized canister exploding filled the kitchen. "Camille, how could you? How dare you?" My mother's voice was unrecognizable. It was high and shredded with a panic I had never heard before. "Hello, Mother," I said, my voice quiet. I picked up my tiny espresso cup and took a sip. The coffee was dark and bitter and perfect. "Don't you hello mother me. You have humiliated this family. You deliberately, cruelly humiliated your sister. On her wedding day. Our phones, they have not stopped ringing. Everyone knows. All those pictures. Helen, Marianne, you stole our family. You did this to embarrass us." I took another sip of espresso. I looked at the dark liquid. No, I said, my voice as calm as the morning. I did not do anything to you. I got married. The same day I had always planned to get married. You and Dad were invited. You chose to go to Lena's wedding instead. That was your choice. We had no choice, she shrieked. Everyone has a choice, I said. I finally made mine, and it seems other people were happy to make theirs, too. People came. It was a beautiful wedding. There was a fumbling sound, a muffled roar. Camille? Camille, is that you? My father's voice, Robert, suddenly on the line. He sounded weak, bewildered. I'm here, Dad. Honey, he started, his voice adopting the wheedling, placating tone he always used when he was about to ask me to capitulate. Listen to me. You have always been the strong one, the practical one. You're the one who understands. You know how your sister is. You know she needs the spotlight. You've always been so good at yielding. It was just easier. We had to. We assumed you would, Assumed I would what, Dad? I cut him off, my voice still quiet, but with a new edge, a surgical precision. Assumed I would just absorb the cost? Assumed I would just quietly move my entire life to accommodate again? Assumed I would be the shock absorber again? Before he could answer, another voice cut through the kitchen, clear, old, and sharp as glass. Robert, you stop that right now. My grandmother Helen was leaning forward in her chair, her gaze fixed on the phone. Mom? My father's voice was a small squeak. You're there? You flew to Italy? Of course I'm here, Helen snapped. I went to my granddaughter's wedding, the one I was invited to. What you did, Robert, and what you did, Judy, was not easier. It was cowardly, and you will not put the burden of your cowardice on Camille's shoulders. Not one more time. Mom, you don't understand. My mother began to cry. I understand perfectly, Helen said, her voice rising. Kinship is not crisis management. Family is not about deciding who is easier to disappoint. It is about who you are willing to show up for. And you have told this girl her entire life that she is not worth the trip. The line was silent. My father was, for the first time in his life, speechless. I picked up the thread. Helen had opened the door. I was going to walk through it. I was not going to yell. I was going to collate. Let's look at the data. Dad, I said, my voice becoming the voice I used in boardrooms. I'm a logistician. I believe in patterns. When I was 8 years old, I was cut out of the family portrait because I didn't fit in the frame, and you hung it on the wall. Camille, that was... I'm not finished. When I was 16, my birthday was merged with Lena's half-birthday because she couldn't stand not having a party. It was easier. For my college graduation, you and Mom left my celebration early to take Lena shopping for prom dresses. It was easier. 5 years ago, at Thanksgiving, I cooked the entire meal, and you took the family photo while I was in the kitchen plating the dessert. The caption was, "My whole world." My chair was empty. I let the facts sit in the air. This, I said, gesturing to the kitchen, the sunlight. This was not an attack. This was a pattern recognition. You have spent 30 years teaching me that my only function was to be convenient. You taught me that your love was conditional on my ability to be low maintenance. That is not true, my mother wept. We love you. We always just... I thought choosing the easier option was better, for everyone. Her defense was so small, so hollow. It collapsed in the silence of the room. Easier for whom, Mother? The question hung in the air, sharp, clean, unanswerable. Easier for whom? Harder for whom? That is the logistical question you never, not once, stopped to ask. Every single time you chose easy, you were just transferring the cost. You were just making it harder for someone else. And that someone was always me. I was the invisible price you all agreed to pay to keep Lena happy. I was the line item you were willing to cut. The silence that followed was total. It was heavier than brick. It was the sound of a 30-year-old narrative collapsing under its own weight. There was nothing left but the truth. I heard my mother take a sharp, ragged breath. I heard my father's faint, defeated sigh. There was nothing more to say. They had no counter-argument. The data was absolute. I picked up the phone. My hand was perfectly steady. "I'm done," I said, my voice soft now, almost gentle. It was the gentleness of finality. "I'm done managing this for you. I'm done auditioning for a place at your table. I'm done standing at your door, hoping to be let in." I looked out the kitchen window, at the green and silver valley, at the solid, true line of the horizon. "I have my own table now. The people who are supposed to be here are here." "Camille, wait, please." My father's voice was desperate. "I have to go. Dad, I'm married. I have guests." I did not slam the phone. I did not raise my voice. I simply pressed the red end icon. The click was quiet, definitive. The silence in the kitchen was profound. It was no longer tense. It was clear. I stood there for a long moment, my hand still on the phone. A shadow fell across me. Ethan was standing in the doorway, his outline backlit by the bright morning. He didn't speak. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just walked over to me, stood behind me, and placed his two warm, solid hands on my shoulders. It was not a gesture of comfort. It was a gesture of confirmation. It said, "I am here. We are here." I leaned back into him, just an inch. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the first one that felt like it had reached the bottom of my lungs in years. I looked out the window, the Val di Serene, the Valley of Serenity. The olive trees were still, their leaves silver in the sharp morning light. The cypress trees were still standing their guard. The view had not changed. But I had the first knot, the one that had been tightening in my chest since I was 8 years old. The one that made me believe I had to earn my place in every picture, had finally, impossibly been untied. I could breathe. 1 week later, the villa was quiet. The joyful, chaotic noise of the real table had faded. The minivans had departed, and the last of the laughter had been absorbed by the ancient, honey-colored stones. The house was breathing again, settling back into its own rhythm. The air, which for days had been electric with reunion, was now still, thick with the lingering, layered scents of candle wax, spilled red wine, dry wood from the fireplace, and the persistent green-gold perfume of the olive groves. It was no longer a venue, it was our home. Ethan and I found a new, gentler pace. We spent the mornings in the kitchen, just the two of us, drinking coffee, the massive room silent except for the scrape of a spoon against a ceramic cup. The digital life of the wedding, however, was just beginning. The real table group chat, which I had expected to go dormant, was exploding. It was a flood of grainy, joyful, badly lit phone pictures. The professional photos were weeks away, but these were better. There was a shot of my Aunt Marianne and Uncle Victor, arm in arm, trying to dance on the uneven terrace, their faces blurred with laughter. There was a photo of Grandma Helen, her eyes sharp and bright, raising a glass of champagne, the light catching her in a way that made her look timeless. Then there was the photo that had become the new group icon, the one the photographer had snapped during the toast. It was a beautiful disaster. It was chaos, perfectly captured. I was in the center, my head thrown back, laughing. Ethan's arm was around my waist. Ray was next to us, her face a joyous grimace as she shouted, and in the foreground, Maya was a streak of motion, her hand reaching for a piece of cake. A blur of pure, childish desire. You could see the cracked vase, still holding its olive branches. You could see the spilled wine. It was the complete, categorical opposite of the photo from my childhood, the one that had been neatly, perfectly cropped to erase me. This photo. You could not be cropped from this photo. You were either in the beautiful, messy, loving chaos, or you were not there at all. It was a picture of a table that was so full. It was spilling over. I was sitting on the terrace, scrolling through these images, smiling, when a new message appeared at the top of my screen. A single, private text. It was from Lena. My breath hitched. My thumb hovered. It was the first time she had reached out since the Boston wedding. I had not spoken to her, or my parents, since the phone call the morning after. I braced myself for the attack, the guilt, the accusation. I opened it. The message was 3 sentences. I saw the pictures on Ray's feed. They are beautiful. I wish you peace. I read it twice. I searched the words for the hidden barbs, the passive aggression I had been trained to expect. I found none. It was not an apology. It was not a defense. It was just a statement, a white flag, maybe, or just an observation from a distant shore. I thought for a long time. I thought of 1,000 replies. I could have sent her the receipts of a lifetime. I could have demanded an apology. I could have said, "It's a little late for that." Instead, I typed 4 words. "I wish you happiness." My thumb hovered over the keyboard. 1,000 other replies, accusations, and questions died before I could type them. What was the point? The war was over. I had won. Not by defeating her, but by simply leaving the battlefield. I turned off the screen. It was enough. A few days later, Ray called. Her voice was back to its normal, brisk, ER Dr. Pace, the sound of Chicago traffic in the background. "Just so you know," she said, "you've ruined all future family holidays. We're going to be sitting at some rented event hall in Boston, eating dry chicken, and everyone is just going to be thinking about Lucia's bistecca." I laughed. "You're all welcome back anytime." "Don't tempt me," she said, her voice softening. "Hey, Cammy, I talked to my mom, and I talked to Grandma." She paused. "I'm not kidding. I have not heard my grandmother laugh like that. Well, ever. Not since my grandpa died. Anyway, she sounded light. She said you didn't just throw a party. You reset the bones. You're a weird kind of surgeon. Cammy." Reset the bones. I liked that. That afternoon, I found a small, smooth piece of terracotta, a broken tile left over from the restoration. I took a permanent marker, and in my most careful, clear script, I wrote a new house rule. I hung it on a small, rusted nail by the kitchen door, the door that led to the terrace. It said, "This house is open to those willing to climb the hill." It was a boundary and an invitation, all in one. It stated, simply, that I was no longer in the business of running downhill to meet people who would not take a single step up to see me. It was that sign that made me do it. Ethan found me on the terrace that evening, watching the light turn the valley from gold to a deep, bruised purple. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, sitting beside me, placing his warm hand over mine. "I'm thinking about that phone call," I said. "The one with my parents, and I'm thinking about Lena's text." "Okay," he said, his voice neutral, a safe harbor. "I'm not angry anymore," I said, the realization surprising me as I said it. I'm just tired, and I'm free, but I'm also done. I'm done with the fight." I took a breath. "I want to invite them to dinner." Ethan was quiet. He didn't say, "Are you sure?" He didn't say, "After everything?" He just watched me. He trusted me. "Okay, when?" Not a party, not a celebration, not a summit, just dinner, here, in the kitchen, soon. I was inviting them not because I needed them to accept. I was inviting them because, for the first time in my life, I was genuinely, completely, and peacefully okay if they said no. The table was set. The chairs were there. But I was not saving them seats. They had to choose to walk to them. I sent one, simple text to the 3 of them, my mother, my father, and my sister. "Ethan and I are in Tuscany for the next month. We are making dinner this Thursday at 7. If you would like to come, the house is open." I didn't offer to pay for flights. I didn't offer to coordinate. I just sent the invitation. I put it into the world and let it go. 2 days later, my mother replied, "We will be there. Thursday, At 7 o'clock, I heard the sound. The crunch of a rental car's tires on the white gravel of the driveway. My heart didn't pound. I just felt a stillness. Ethan and I stood at the kitchen door. I was wearing an apron, my hands covered in flour. I was making pasta from scratch. They got out of the car, my father, my mother, and Lena. They looked small. They looked exhausted. In Boston, they had been the main characters, the managers, the stars. Here, in the vast, quiet landscape, against the backdrop of the ancient stone, they looked like what they were. 3 tired people, braced for a fight. They looked up at the villa, and their shoulders slumped. It was real. They walked to the kitchen door. My mother, Judy, who was always so perfectly put together, had her hands clenched at her sides. My father, Robert, looked at the ground, and Lena, who I had only ever seen in a blaze of confident color, was wearing a simple black sweater and looked pale. They stopped a few feet from us, in the twilight. It was the awkward, terrible silence of people who have no script. They were immigrants to my new world, and they did not speak the language. "Hello," I said, my voice soft. I wiped my hands on my apron. "Come in, dinner is almost ready." We ate in the kitchen, not at the long, grand table under the pergola. That was for the real table. This was for something else. This was for the broken table. We sat at the massive, scarred wooden block in the center of the kitchen. It was close, intimate, and there was nowhere to hide. For the first 30 minutes, the only sounds were the clinking of forks against Lucia's ceramic plates and the pouring of wine. Ethan was a quiet, steady buffer, asking neutral questions about their flight, the drive. The answers were monosyllabic. The tension was so thick it was like a 5th person at the table. Then, slowly, the warmth of the food, the honesty of the wine, began to work. Like butter melting into hot bread, the rigid, defensive postures began to soften. My mother was the first to break. She had been pushing a single piece of pasta around her plate for 5 minutes. She set her fork and knife down, the clatter echoing in the stone room. She looked at her hands, then at me. Her eyes were red. "This house," she said, her voice a low whisper. "It's so solid. It feels like it's been here forever." I nodded, waiting. "You were always so strong. Camille," she continued, the tears starting to fall. "You were always the one who just handled everything. I realize now." She choked on a sob. "You were strong because we abandoned our post. We left you to hold the line, all by yourself, and we never, ever looked back to see if you were okay. We just let you." My father put his hand over hers. He looked at me, his gaze direct for the first time, all the bluster and weakness gone. "She's right," he said, his voice rough. "We mistook your silence. We told ourselves it meant you didn't need us, that it was easier for you, that you liked being the capable one." He shook his head, a look of profound, weary shame on his face. "It was a lie, a story we told ourselves so we could do what was easy. I was wrong. Camille, I was wrong. I listened. I didn't absolve them. I didn't say it was okay. I just received the truth." Then I looked at Lena. She had been silent, staring at the table, tears rolling silently down her face and dripping onto her plate. She hadn't been chosen for this confession. She wasn't the star. "Lena?" I asked, my voice gentle. She looked up, and the raw, unshielded loneliness in her eyes winded me. "I just wanted to be seen," she whispered, her voice cracking. I thought if I was bright enough, if I was loud enough, if everyone was always looking at me, it meant I mattered." She looked at me, her sister, her rival. I never understood. I thought I'd won. I thought I'd gotten the wedding, and I stood there, and the room. Her voice broke. That ballroom. Cammy. It was so empty. It was so cold. I never, ever realized that being chosen, could make you the loneliest person in the entire world. She put her face in her hands and sobbed, a deep, rattling, ugly sound that had nothing to do with performance. I looked at these three broken people, my family, the architects of my oldest wounds, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, just a vast, quiet, empty space. The room was silent, save for Lena's crying. This was the start, not forgiveness, not a happy ending, but the first, honest, painful conversation we had ever had. They had, finally, in their own broken way, climbed the hill. The silence in the kitchen after Lena's confession was heavier than the stone walls around us. It was the absolute, airless quiet that follows a building's collapse. For 30 years, we had been living in a structure built on lies, convenience, and polite, damaging fictions, and it had just, finally, come down. I pushed my chair back. The scrape of the wood against the terracotta floor was loud, a sharp, tearing sound in the quiet. "Come with me," I said. It was not a request. I led the three of them, my mother, my father, my sister, out of the kitchen's warm, confessional light. We walked onto the main terrace. The night was vast and cool, the air was clear, and the sky was a sharp, diamond-hard spray of stars. The valley below was a sea of profound, uninterrupted black. The long wooden table, the one that had hosted the real table, was a dark, solid shadow under the pergola. It was waiting. Ethan had done what I asked. At the head of the table, a few of the lanterns from our wedding night had been lit. They cast a low, golden, intimate glow, just enough to see by. The scene was set. My family stood, huddled and uncertain, ghosts at a feast that had already ended. I walked to the head of the table, to the chair where I had sat, and next to it, I had placed one single, empty chair. From the pocket of my linen pants, I pulled a long, simple, dark green ribbon, the kind Aldo used to tie the young olive saplings to their support stakes. My mother watched me, her face pale and tracked with tears. "Camille, what are you doing?" I didn't answer. I faced the empty chair. Slowly, deliberately, I tied the green ribbon in a firm, simple knot around the smooth, worn wood of the chair back. I rested my hand on top of it. "This chair," I said, my voice quiet, but it carried in the still night air. "This is for the little girl who waited, the one who waited to be picked up from ballet, the one who waited for her name to be called for a prize she had won, the one who waited by the door, hoping to be chosen." I turned to look at them. My mother flinched. My father looked down at his feet. Lena just watched me, her face a mask of dawning, horrified understanding. "I am not that little girl anymore," I said. "My waiting is over." I tapped my hand on the back of the chair, a gesture of finality. "From now on, this chair, and every chair at this table, is only for people who know how to show up." A slow, steady sound came from the darkness of the kitchen doorway. The thump, thump, thump of a cane on stone. My grandmother Helen emerged from the shadow. Ethan was a step behind her, his hand lightly on her elbow, but she was moving under her own power. She had been listening. She walked past me. She walked past my parents. She did not look at the ribboned chair. She walked directly to the chair on its other side. With a quiet, determined sigh, she lowered herself into it. She placed both of her gnarled, 91-year-old hands flat on the wooden table. She looked at me, and she gave a single, sharp, satisfied nod. It was an endorsement, a co-signature. The Queen had taken her seat at the new court. I looked back at my parents and Lena. "I want to be very clear about something," I said. "This," I gestured to the villa, the valley, Tuscany. "This was not just a wedding. This was the start. The real table is not a one-time event. It is the new tradition, every year, on this same weekend. The real table will gather. It might be here. It might be at Ray's in Chicago. It might be in Uncle Victor's workshop. The location does not matter, but it will happen. It is a gathering for the people who are willing to show up. That is the new family calendar. My mother, Judy, was trembling. She was destroyed, but it was a different kind of breaking. It was not the high-pitched panic of being caught. It was the deep, hollowed-out ache of finally, truly, understanding. She fumbled with her left hand, twisting a ring on her finger. It was an old, magnificent sapphire, her own mother's ring, the one she swore she would never take off. "Camille," she whispered, her voice raw. She couldn't find the words. "I'm sorry" was a useless, tiny pebble of a word. She pulled the heavy ring from her finger. It looked enormous, impossibly blue, in the low lantern light. She held it out to me, her hand shaking so badly the ring rattled in her palm. "Please," she begged, a sound that tore from her. "Please, take this, as a promise, a down payment, that from now on, I will come. I will show up. I will be there." It was a plea. It was a desperate, transactional attempt to use a symbol to fix a structural problem. I looked at the ring, the old Camille, the one who was starving for any proof of value, would have snatched it from her hand. I looked at her, and then I slowly, gently, closed her own fingers back over the ring. "No," I said, my voice kind. Her face crumpled, mistaking it for a final rejection. "No," I said again, more firmly. "I am not interested in symbols anymore. I am not interested in down payments. I am only interested in action." I held her gaze, my hand still over her closed fist. "You keep it, and wear it. And if you mean what you say, then you can bring it with you, on your hand, to the real table next year. The action is the only proof. Mom, not the object." She looked at the ring, trapped inside her own hand. She nodded. A small, sharp, understanding sob. She slid it back onto her finger. My father, Robert, finally spoke. His voice was low, stripped of all its old, practiced bluster. He looked like a man who had just seen the real, unsparing architecture of his life. "Cammy," he said, his voice rough, Are there seats for us? At this new table? Do we still have seats?" I looked at him. I looked at the long, dark, empty table stretching out before us, with its 30 empty chairs, all waiting in the shadows. "The seats are always here, Dad," I said quietly. "The table is big enough. The seats are always here." I paused, letting the hope settle in him. Then I finished the sentence. "But you have to choose to sit in them. You just have to show up, on time." On time. The two words hung in the air. The perfect, deliberate inverse of "it's just easier." Lena, who had been silent this whole time, a statue of regret, finally moved. She stepped forward, past her parents. She didn't look at me. She looked at the empty chair, the one with the green ribbon. She reached out one pale, trembling finger and just barely, just lightly, touched the fabric. "The girl who waited," she whispered, the words just for herself. She turned to me, her eyes raw, all the old, bright, competitive fire completely extinguished. "I spent my whole life making sure I was never that girl," she said, her voice cracking. "I fought so hard to be the center, to get the spotlight, to make sure I was wearing the crown. I thought that was how you won." She shook her head, a small, violent gesture of self-disgust. "I don't want a crown. I don't want to win anymore." She looked at me, and it was the first time in my 32 years I felt she was actually, truly seeing me, her sister. I just want to sit at a table with you, Cammy, not instead of you." It was the last knot, the final, tangled piece, and it was undone. I placed my hand, palm down, on the cool, solid wood of the table. Then Ethan, who had been a silent, supportive shadow, stepped up beside me. He placed his hand next to mine. A beat of silence. Slowly, my father stepped forward, He placed his hand on the table. Then my mother, her hand still bearing the heavy ring. And finally, Lena. Her small, cold hand rested on the wood, next to mine. The five of us, standing at the head of the table, we didn't speak, we didn't cry, we just were present. The silence wasn't the silence of anger, it wasn't the silence of avoidance. It was the silence of simple, shared existence. The only sounds were the high thin of the crickets in the grove, the faint, sharp smell of the thyme we had crushed under our feet, and the sound of 5 people, breathing in the same cool Tuscan air. I looked up, past the dark pergola, toward the silver-green olive grove, and I finally understood. The great, painful knot of my childhood, the one I had been trying to untie, or cut, or scream at for 30 years, was gone. It hadn't been defeated in a fight. It hadn't been absolved by an apology. It had just been rendered obsolete. I had not won a war. I had just built a new structure, a structure so solid, so sound, and so true, that the old, rotten, broken one had simply collapsed around it and turned to dust. I had built a table where everyone had to show up, or the chair would remain, honestly and visibly, empty. The night wind picked up, a gentle, healing breath from the valley. It moved up the terrace. It found the green ribbon on the empty chair. It lifted the fabric, making it flutter, just for a moment, in the lantern light. Beside me, the few lanterns we had lit swayed in the breeze, their warm, golden light pulsing. They looked like a calm, steady heart, beating in the darkness. I knew, standing there, my hand flat on the wood, my husband on one side, my family on the other, that this was the final frame, the new one, the one that was big enough to hold everyone. And this time, no one, not me, not even them, would ever be cut out of the picture again. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where in the world you are tuning in from. So please comment below, and let's connect and share our thoughts. Make sure you are subscribed to Lila Revenge Stories. Like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.